All right, I think we are ready for tonight's community conversation. I think I'm gonna stick with my notes that way I can I'm not scatterbrained. Hello and welcome to the third community conversation. These conversations, like the previous two, come out from multiple nonprofit organizations who came together after the Harvest Homecoming shootings to see how we could all serve the community amidst such a tragedy. It's our hope that these conversations will engage and enlighten our Southern Indiana community. I do want to point out that tonight's conversation could be a particularly tough conversation for someone to hear, especially if you are like me, that you have lost a loved one that's committed suicide involving a firearm. If any time during our conversation you need to take a break, please push pause and catch up whenever you're ready. If you should need this evening or more immediately, please know that you can text or call 988 or 911 to speak with someone immediately. Your mental health is important to us and is a part of the reason for this conversation this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest this evening on our conversation for home and gun safety. To my right, which would be your left, is Judge Karaffa. He's been involved with practicing law for 14 years and is currently serving as the Clark County Circuit Court 1 judge, which he's been on the bench since 2022. Judge Karaffa is a lifetime, or actually he's been a lifetime resident of New Albany, or now Jeffersonville, but in Southern Indiana. We just found out that we had the same path: Mount Tabor Elementary, Hazelwood Junior High, back when it was junior high, and then New Albany Senior High. So he serves as well on the Community Corrections Advisory Board, the Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council, the Indiana Judicial Education Subcommittee. I'm gonna mess up this word. Is a Rotarian. And is actively involved with Clark County's problem-solving courts, which maybe I'd love for you to share more about that later tonight. And then Mr. Andrew Wathen, to my left, your right, is a highly experienced and retired Army National Guard officer after 22 and a half years service in the National Guard Army. Thank you, Andrew, for your service. We were talking earlier, you had multiple deployments. You thought maybe span over about 8 years, 8.5 years. Andrew's also spent considerable time over the past 16 years on 2 different law enforcement agencies. He's currently the Floyd County Sheriff's Department training coordinator, which is actually more than just firearms in the Sheriff's Department. And he's been a part of the Floyd County Sheriff's Department for the past 9 years. I guess that leaves me probably the ugliest guy on the panel. I'm Wade Thaxton. I'm the CEO of Brandon's House Counseling Center here in New Albany. We're actually right across the street from the New Albany Public Library. I've been leading Brandon's House for about 2.5 years as we've been expanding our services to continue to provide free counseling to Southern Indiana community. I'm also involved in the Floyd County local coalition known as ATOD. That's alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. I'm on the board there. And if I might add, in a more sarcastic note, I like short walks on the beach, fast rides on my mountain bike, and living life to the fullest with my beautiful wife and 2 kids here in Southern Indiana. So if you have yet to hear Brandon's House, we are the only mental health provider offering completely free counseling to specifically teens and families in Southern Indiana. We're located at 421 West 1st Street, New Albany, Indiana. And should you need our number, 812-949-2499, you can call and make an appointment. We do have a wait list right now that's probably going to about a couple months. So tonight's conversation, we're here to talk about home and firearm safety. But first, let me start it off with a few statistics. Which, if you're like me, you may not have known some of these, statistics that relate to Clark and Floyd County. I'd like to add first that these statistics represent people and families in our community. each number is a life and has been ended before natural causes could render the final verdict. To me, there's a sadness in these statistics that we hope tonight's conversation will help educate and motivate our community to be more conscious of owning and operating a firearm if they so choose. Last year, Clark County had 19 gun-related deaths, and Floyd County had 10 gun-related deaths. Pulling back to the U.S., in the U.S., there's a 54% firearm, 54% of the firearm deaths are actually self-inflicted gunshot wounds, and 43% of the firearm deaths are from homicide. So if we extrapolate, jumping ahead of myself. In Clark County, roughly 18 people took their own life, while 11 people in Floyd County took their own life. Now, if we extrapolate that 54% from the U.S. on those that firearm was involved, it was 10 people for Clark County and 7 people for Floyd County used a firearm to end their own life. If I may share tonight my own personal story, this is probably my best contribution to this panel. I actually have 3 loved ones who took their lives here in Southern Indiana with the use of a firearm. The first one being my brother Kyle back in 2002. The second one being my father back in 2015, so about 10 years ago this June. Then I also had a cousin in 2007. So this is a painfully serious topic for us to cover tonight, but my hope is with 2 professionals, really from 2 different perspectives, one from the law enforcement side and one from the judicial side. We hope that this conversation can be enlightening and help others operate and own safely guns. So with that said, Andrew, I'm going to start with you with hopefully I guess kind of an easy. I had a really heavy moment there, but I want to lighten it up. That's usually my way of dealing with it. So start with a light question with you, Andrew. What are some of the basic rules and habits for anyone who owns and stores a gun inside their home? What are some of those rules or habits they should follow?
Most of the common practices or rules are related to, the locking mechanisms
On the gun itself.
on the gun itself. Making sure that ammunition, if you can separate ammunition and the firearm itself, then that's one more step in a safe direction. And then putting them in a position, in a place in your home to where it's out of reach of kids or the individual in your house that are not responsible enough yet to make sound decisions.
I like that distinction. I appreciate that.
I think that those are the main, the locking mechanisms, the one you got in front of you. There are all kinds of different ones out there. That's probably one of the most common ones. But that'll keep any firearm from going bang, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And but that and educating is one of the basic rules and habits that we continually talk to the community about, is especially the kids and youth, the seriousness of what a firearm can do. And, but those are probably be the 2 number 1 things. Where you store it, having locks on them, keeping them out of places in your home, like in the movies we see the underneath your pillow, underneath the mattress, by the bedstand, those kind of things, and obviously in the real world, those are definitely not places you want to be storing a firearm that anybody can get a hold of.
Yeah, for sure. I think I don't know where I heard this, if this is from the internet or what, but I think it helps kids keep this in perspective if there winds up being a youth that sees this video. Is firing a bullet is a lot like squirting out toothpaste. Can't put it back in. Can't take that bullet back after that gun has been fired. You can't change the circumstance. So I think that's hopefully a illustration that would make sense to a youth. Since we at Brandon's House work with a lot of youth, like I mentioned before, we provide counseling to teens and families here locally. Can you share what you think are some of the safest policies to adhere when it comes to youth and firearms inside the home?
I think most of it's education. And if I would just tell any family, the policy that I have, is what I do to my own kids, is make sure they understand how powerful, what the effects of a firearm can do, you know, and to take it serious because they're watching the movies, they're the TikToks, you know, what engages our youth so much right now. And it's portrayed something different than it is because they don't see, smell the effects of, you know, the realism of a firearm. They're looking at toy guns in the house maybe and growing up BB guns, those kind of things, and see the damage that it causes. You know, you made a good reference as far as the toothpaste, putting that back in. Yeah, I tell a lot of people that talk to me about it, not only firearm safety, but if you can talk about the medical side of this with your kids, and when you talk tourniquets and talk about CPR, and I think those kind of go hand in hand because a lot of times they understand the realism of the effects of that could happen. But you know, we put on training all the time, but when you have some of the realistic training, you know, the capabilities we have today with, you know,
wound care.
yeah, wound can't stop the bleed type of stuff. You talk pressure dressing, you squirt veins, and that really puts it in perspective of, oh my gosh, you know, this is serious. And but to go back to the question, you know, education, I think is the number one thing. Yeah, and that alone is probably the biggest thing that I would say from my end.
Sure. I think some people might even take the approach of like, I'm not gonna tell my kids I have a gun, or I'm not gonna show that gun. I know for me, from a personal perspective, when my wife who grew up with a father and a brother who hunted, so it wasn't like she had never seen a gun, or the impact that a gun can cause, you know, with an animal that's been harvested. She was very nervous about us having guns even before kids. We wound up taking a training course offered through the New Albany Police Department. Officer Denny did it, and it was a couple different times that I think we met in class. And after that education, she now felt comfortable. She knew what I knew, as far as operating and owning a firearm. And then consequently, she tested better at the range. And so I told her, I said, well, since you're the better shot, that means you got to go face the intruder, right? She's the more deadly shot. So, no, that's I appreciate that. I wonder, and this is a little bit off my question here, and just a thought or feeling for either one of you. Would you say, or would you think that maybe all the video games and sometimes how realistic they are, is that been like a desensitizing, I guess, problem, not a problem, or just something that's desensitized our youth for what that firearm truly represents? So I think that could be a possibility.
Absolutely. You know, I'll put on some training, some active shooter response training, and when you look at the shootings that occur now with youth, and not only are they becoming very effective, we're getting studies back that show these shooters never been to a range before and actually shot, but these first person shooter games and technology is so realistic, and they're looking at things that were never taught before. You know, the accuracy of where to stand in a ring, how to be effective, and those kind of things that these games are teaching kids is it's unbelievable. And due to technology, I mean, even law enforcement training, technology has greatly just taken it through the roof, and you can do these simunition type style trainings and never go to a firearms, you know, a range and actually shoot a lot of rounds. So the kids nowadays have access to that, and a lot of studies have been going on to show that that's really taking effect.
Some of the recommendations I found when we were talking about home safety, still the majority of this conversation revolves around firearms, but some of the recommendations I found when I was searching online to make your home a little safer was to make sure your doors and windows are secure with appropriate and working locks. I'm sure I've got a few locks that are probably not the best. Use a security system. Have good lighting in the outdoor areas that typically are entry points into your home, and have emergency plan for fire, intruder, and natural disasters. Andrew, I thought maybe this would be a good time for you to speak into what families, could or should include in those home emergency plans.
Sure, I think that, the only thing I can think of is sort of natural disasters, and when chaos happens, unfortunately, it's oftentimes, the worst environment, right? You're away from your kids or family members, and sometimes you may have a relative or friend that's gonna help out. And so one thing I tell a lot of people is have like a safe password, or, hey, this is the spot we're gonna meet at. You stay here for this time, and if somebody else comes pick you up, they're gonna talk about, this and use this password, if you will. But that's, from that, just natural disasters more than anything else, but, yeah. In the training, we kind of talked about the active shooter lane, which you can kind of tie back to this in the fact that, most of the time that displacement, the chaos happens, where's the reintegration plan, with your student, with your kids, and how does that work? Cell phones aren't working, those kind of things, so, just taking that plan, that little extra step, that could be very effective, but all those things hit, that you talked about, locking doors, the lights, with majority of Floyd and Clark County, I'm safe to say that most of these crimes are crimes of opportunity, quick entry, exit type of thing, getting in people's cars, those kind of things, so it's, I think that if you follow those basic ones that you just said, that's gonna really deteriorate the chances of your own action.
Okay. Judge Karaffa, from a more of a perspective from where you sit on the bench, what should a home and or gun owner do if an intruder has broken into their home as it pertains to the law?
Okay, well, this is not legal advice, let me just say that, I'm
Yeah.
not allowed to give any legal advice. First thing I would say is call law enforcement, call 911. And you're allowed to use, deadly force, to protect yourself, but that needs to be a last resort, and obviously, the amount of, and you can probably speak to it better, most people who break into homes aren't doing it knowing someone's in there. And truthfully, from the cases I've dealt with, most of the time, if the intruder realizes there's somebody there, they usually take off. With that said, if you do have a right to use deadly force to protect your ones in your home, Catholic doctrine in Indiana, but in terms of actual advice on what to do if someone breaks into your home, I usually deal with it after the fact, and so if you're trying to tell someone how to be more proactive, I would say that would probably be a question for law enforcement as to what you do, whether you should hide, engage, things like that. I'd probably be doing everyone a disservice if I gave them my experience, as I said earlier, is limited to probably movies and things like that as to what I think I could do and what would actually happen. So,
Andrew, you want to offer anything on that question about what should you do? What should a homeowner and gun, or it doesn't have to be a homeowner, you could be in an apartment, I guess, a gun owner should do as far as when their home environment has been broken into?
Sure, in your home type of deal, and that's a tough question because, ultimately, I'll go back and tell people, if you don't train on the firearm, then you probably shouldn't do anything other than maybe a run, hide, fight plan like they talk about in an active shooter scenario. But when we see accidents happen with firearms, a lot of the times it's because people don't receive that training. They own a firearm, they go out and buy one, but they don't train themselves up on the safety, how to utilize them correctly, and that's when accidents happen. So when you think about the stress that you'd be under if someone's breaking into your home, it's kind of the reason a lot of people say don't have a loaded firearm by your bed. Just thinking about getting startled from asleep, and then you're going to grab a firearm which you probably never trained on and try to do something effective with it. So
I even think about that from the aspect of, let's say I was startled, something loud bang, something fell or broke, and my child came out of his or her room, and in my sleep or fumbling with that firearm, I thought about that, like I'm gonna have to, you know, I'm not gonna be a sniper situation in my home. And, I'm gonna flip on the lights and make sure of my target. And, you know, but then that exposes me at the same time, so I don't know, hopefully I'll just have my windows and doors secure, my lights, proper lighting, that'll be the right way to go. Next question here, while looking for, or actually a little. While looking for resources for firearms training, I learned, last week. And I know there's other, locations or other, organizations out there or other stores, or American Shooter in Clarksville. Has multiple firearms, training courses, if you look on there, they have firearms training courses for the novice, the beginner. I think you don't even have to have your own gun. You can rent one there. And then they have courses that go all the way up through the experts. So that's one way. You're talking about practice. When people need to, maybe you can't go to you don't have enough acreage or farmland, you can't shoot there, so you can go inside. Let's see. Oh, and now's a good time. I was thinking to mention that the library will have a limited supply of gun locks. That if you wanted to drop in, see the front desk and ask them about the gun locks that you saw in the video, then those will be there for free for anyone that wants one. Stop by and pick one up there. Let's see. Mental health and firearms have a tenuous relationship that can end with deadly consequences. Andrew, would you have any maybe personal stories or stories where you've been involved with firearms that you could give an example that share with the audience where you talked about or been in maybe that situation where you can tell the individual struggling, yet they have a firearm, or they're, maybe they don't have a firearm. Maybe there's one maybe it's not on their person, but you don't know when you go into someone's house or into the environment that's not known.
Sure. A couple instances, I think it's all in kind of how you break down mental health and doing some training on that here just recently, and the factors that go with mental health is kind of where I'm going, especially with youth nowadays. Just like depression, how it affects your mental health and how stress can take a toll on your mind. And when we talk about things like we've seen it all, like people going through a divorce, and all of a sudden can lose 50 pounds immediately. Like how is that the stress of your body changes your body, changes your mind. And then when we go into our youth, like we talked before, like the social media platform of this is happening and it's referring to me, or my video didn't get enough likes, or all these kind of things that are going on there, the anxiety and the depression, and that's where I think some of these numbers have rose when it comes to suicide with our youth. But that kind of mental health relationship, and we get the calls for suicidal subjects and the youth struggling, and I think that's where that ties in. A lot of times it'll come from the school, come from the internet, those kind of things is what we're seeing a little more uptick in and frequently.
Sounds like there's a fair amount of training, and I'm not surprised really of the individual and the circumstances the individual could be in that the officer has been trained to de-escalate or to recognize and consider that part of the whole picture, the whole environment, circumstance that they come to.
Absolutely. That's something we're given some instruction on the last few weeks with our officers. It's a yearly requirement. We talk about mental health and how we deal with that, people with disabilities or mental illnesses, and helping us make better decisions and be better problem solvers for when we show up to these calls. But yeah, it's amazing how you can tie almost everything to even addiction and how addiction affects your mental health, and it drives crime and drives our response.
Yeah.
you know, where you got drugs and addiction, you often have firearms, so
Mhm.
it all goes hand in hand. It's, you know, it's a big circle, so you gotta make sure you don't just train the firearm piece, you gotta train
Right.
everything else that goes with it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, shifting gears a little bit here, one of the laws that I recently learned about was brought up actually in our previous conversation back in January, where Beth Keeney of Life Springs was hosting that last month, is Indiana's red flag gun law. And Judge, we talked a little bit about it, or actually you, I think we're presenting it to a group of people that I was a part of. Could you share some information about the red flag law, how it can be used to keep our community safe, and what all this law details?
Okay, initially, why the red flag law was put in place back in 2004, an individual in Indianapolis, was hospitalized for in a mental health crisis. He had firearms and made some threats, and law enforcement attempted to seize those firearms. There was no legal justification for them to keep those guns once he was released from treatment. And unfortunately, he armed himself with an SKS, which is a Soviet-style rifle, and wounded 4 officers and killed another officer. And so the legislature tried to figure out what's a way that we can not, we can put a reasonable regulation on a fundamental right. Second Amendment of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 32 of the Indiana Constitution, we have the right to keep and bear arms. And so and this is a tool that law enforcement in our community can use, and I'll talk about due process a lot, because it's a fundamental right to have a firearm. And if the government is going to come in and say you can't have a firearm, there needs to be stopgap. So there's several of those along the way. The way traditionally usually works is I'll get a call from an officer saying, hey, we have an individual, and I'll use some of the language here. Would say this individual is a dangerous person, and that's when that's somebody who presents an imminent risk of personal injury to the individual or to another individual, or an individual presents a risk of personal injury to the individual or another individual in the future, and that individual has a mental health issue and they're not taking medication. And so if that person has a firearm and the officer says, hey, I think this is a dangerous person, he then requests a warrant. He'll fill out all the interactions they have. Most of the red flags I get, it's not the first time an officer has dealt with an individual. They request the court seize that firearm and with a warrant. Once that warrant's signed, the officer can seize that firearm, and then we set that for a hearing within 14 days. So at that point, we've gone, the officer has to make a statement under oath in that warrant, and then we have a full-blown hearing to where the officer has to testify as to why he believes this person is dangerous and shouldn't have a firearm. And then that person can come in and present their evidence as well. If the court determines that the person is a dangerous individual and should have their firearm seized, that's the whole period can last 5 years, but you can request a hearing after 180 days. At that point, the burden is still on the individual to show that they're not a danger. Once you hit 360 days, the burden then shifts back to the state, saying the state has to show that the person is still dangerous. If at any point during that time the person is determined no longer to be dangerous, the guns are returned to that individual. If at a hearing the person's determined not to be dangerous, if the officer calls it the judge and says all this stuff, and then the gun's not taken. If at the expiration of 5 years from the date of seizure, the gun is still in possession of law enforcement, that gun is then destroyed. So that's and I can't stress this enough. It's a way to try to protect. And the majority of the individuals we deal with, people who are dealing with suicidal ideations, that they've reached out to a family member or someone and said, hey, this, or a law enforcement officer has interacted with someone. And, when we have the hearings, one of the things we talk about is, are you getting mental health treatment? Are you taking medication? And when we go through a litany of questions, and it's designed to try to protect people, not to infringe on it.
Yeah, I think if I remember the story right, shared about an individual who had his firearm taken away. Wasn't happy about that in the moment, but when he was in a better state of mind when he showed up in front of you.
Yeah.
I think he actually thanked you all.
Yes, he
For
did.
doing that, cause you might have saved his life by removing the firearm.
Yeah,
from him.
and we talked to him about, you know, what are the next steps in terms of mental health treatment, getting back onto medication. There's a lot of, and probably see it, people, you know, take their medication, they start feeling okay, they stop taking it, they decompensate, and then it becomes a cycle. And what we try to avoid is, majority of, mentioned it earlier, suicides with males are done with firearms. If we can avoid, someone making a drastic decision in a moment of, you know, either mental health crisis or depression or something like that, and try to get them treatment. And all the while making sure we do it legally and keep their constitutional rights in mind. That's what the red flag law is designed to do, and we don't get a ton of them. I'd say a couple of months, but in any situation where we can hopefully try to avoid an outcome that's not ideal is what we're trying to do.
Maybe we can also dispel a myth too. I was talking to a group of gentlemen who,
Yeah.
you know, were fully, you know, Second Amendment, you know, want to bear their arms. They brought up the scenario that what if my neighbors, you know, who I was, didn't like, and their dog was always in my lawn, and you know, what if they were to call the police and say, hey, John Smith, my neighbor, has a firearm, and I don't, you know, he's being wild with her. I don't trust him. Will you come and take his guns away?
I think that would verge more on if someone's being dangerous with the firearm, that would be more of a law enforcement question as to whether or not someone's committed an actual crime. In terms of red flag, it's more about whether the person presents an imminent risk of personal injury to an individual. And these are usually someone making threats, someone, you know, we've had some people post on Facebook, social media with kind of a cryptic, you know, I'm going to do something, and then it's situations like that. And when I talk about these stopgaps and I'm a gun owner, I respect a person's right to keep and bear arms. And I've had situations where an officer's called and I was like, I don't think that's really enough. It's a one-off situation. And we've had people come to court where the situation's kind of blown over, and you know, there's not been any firearms seized. The main thing is we want to, like I said, respect the Second Amendment and the Indiana Constitution. And it's not here to take people's guns. It's here to, like I said, due process. There's 3 or 4 different levels it has to get to before your guns can be seized. And so it's not, you know, your neighbor looks at you going the wrong way, the SWAT team's gonna kick in your door to take your guns. It's much, I'd say less personal than that. It's usually an officer having, most of the times it happens it's an officer having an interaction with an individual several different times, or a family or friend calling and saying, hey, I'm worried about this person, and then an officer goes out and has it been actually seen. It's not a you know, word of mouth and hearsay and a way to get back. And frankly, if someone tried to abuse this situation or use the red flag law, it wouldn't be I wouldn't handle it. So yeah, but it's not at all designed to infringe on its constitutional rights. So
no, I as a gun owner myself, I appreciate that, especially having had loved ones who, you know, what if that were the case? If a law enforcement officer would have been there, you know, maybe I'd still have that loved one with me today. So, in Clark County Circuit Court 1, where you preside, I'm sure you've seen a host of issues that possibly involve mental health conditions. So, Judge, what types of other cases, either with or without a firearm, might you see in any given week? Can you share some basic information?
Yeah, so Circuit 1, we deal with the high-level felonies. We actually have a murder trial scheduled next week. And we have kind of an odd docket. We have high-level felonies, which is anything from murder to level 5. We also do guardianships, estates, and we do the mental health, the emergency detention orders. And so we see a lot of people who are dealing with mental health issues also in criminal courts. And so, you talked about problem solving courts a little bit. We're trying to start a mental health court in we started it, we're in the process of getting it certified in Clark County to where individuals who are dealing with low-level offenses, we're talking about trespass, public indecency, things like that, and something that officers deal with on a day-to-day basis. We're someone suffering from mental health issues where some treatment and medication is probably the best route to go. And so basically it's a way to keep them out of the jail, but get them the help they need and to avoid, because unfortunately our jail becomes the mental health center for a lot of individuals if they're arrested. And so, and these are, and when I talk about these are low-level offenses or not a victim, it's not any violent offenses. These are usually what people call mental health crimes. Somebody, you know, running around in the street, or like I said, trespassing, they Circle K told they're not supposed to be there, so they show back up, law enforcement comes, they take them in for a trespass. They're usually ROR, and then they'll fail to appear, and then the system just, and so if we can get them some treatment and on medication, and it's usually the way the mental health board works, it would last anywhere between 12 months to 18 months of counseling. We've got a support system, and it's designed to try to eliminate people going back to the jail and being stable.
Sounds like a different solution
Mhm.
for a problem that's been probably around for
Yeah.
quite some time.
And it helps the jail, it helps law enforcement, so they're not, dealing with someone, like I said, it's usually a trespass or something like that. I'm sure we can speak to dealing with the same individuals over and over again. And so if we can try to, and usually it's a lack of family support or things like that, and if we can kind of be a little bit of a support network for them, that's what you're trying to do.
Nice, I like that. Well, we're at our last question. I don't know if we have any questions, nothing there from our audience.
You have questions now?
Yeah, well, I've got one more question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, all right, I'll get this last one. It's an easy one. Last question here. Are there any last thoughts, either of you, Andrew or Judge Karaffa, that you would like to share as it pertains to home and firearm safety, especially from a mental health side of things for our community? Anything that you would like to add that we didn't cover?
I just like to reiterate the training. I've done a training course through the NRA, and it's one of those things where you don't know what you don't know. If you've grown up shooting at, Charlestown State Park or at a gun range, it's your friends and family. It was done by a firearm instructor, and I finally realized why I was always drifting left when I shot. And just someone who knows what they're doing and can point out what you're doing wrong and what you're doing right is very beneficial. And I think everybody who has a firearm should probably, just for your own peace of mind.
Okay. Yeah, I think just to hold in on the fact that, don't be afraid of talking about it in your family. A lot of times we say, we're not gonna talk about it because I don't wanna bring attention to it.
Yeah.
But I found that, if you can talk about, hey, this is what firearms do, this is, educate yourself, take trainings, whatever it is, even at a young age, that can be very beneficial. Okay, nice.
Now, questions from the audience, Neil?
I just, one thing you said I thought was interesting. And I just came back to be educated, I saw you advertise.
Yeah.
I'm not a gun owner, I'm not against gun ownership. But I think a lot of times you hear people say, I have a gun for personal protection. That you said, if you have a gun in your house, for what you say personal protection, someone breaks in your house. You said you didn't even recommend going to that firearm.
If there wasn't a training, yeah.
Which would lead to something else. So that I found that interesting. And the other thing, when you say, if you don't keep your ammunition and your guns together, how is that protection? So how much time would you think it would take for somebody, even with training, if they have if their firearms safely stored as they should and doing everything right, from the time they're alerted, how much time do you think there is for them to get, unlock, load that firearm to be able to use it for personal protection?
No, that's a good question. And I'd be lying to you if I'd say that me being, and now I'll take it as a, as an instructor, and I don't separate my ammunition, and I do keep it where I can get to it. Not bedside like we talked about before, where, it's kind of like the whole theory of, a lot of people put an alarm clock away from their bed so they don't just tattle it because they're still not awake yet, it makes them get up. I tell people that as well, who say, okay, what good is this firearm gonna do to me if I can't get to it quickly and react, to maybe protect my family? And I think that's me personally, I think that's each individual's family's, you gotta assess what, your kids, the responsible people in your house. And I move some things around when I've got teenage daughters and when people come over, I move things around, to where I don't wanna put them or, in a situation, but, I unfortunately, I think it's one of those, never say never, never say always kind of situation, because the whole purpose, I believe, is train and have a gun so you can protect yourself. So there's a fine line, and I think every home is something that gun owner. That's why it's such a huge responsibility, to take that in and make a sound decision based on what's going on in your house.
One of the things, from what we do personally, when I was reading up on some of this, it's mentioned too as a biometric safe. So it's a fingerprint reader safe that basically I have to tap it. I have to tap it once to bring it on and then swipe my thumb. And then it pops open and a loaded gun is inside. So, that protects my kids from being able to get to it. Now they can pick up the whole box and, run outside, but they're not going to get into it. So it does allow me and my wife to have peace of mind that I am prepared for the intruder, and I'm also prepared for my kids should they get too curious.
I'll follow up.
Yeah.
You mentioned training, you mentioned training, everybody mentions training. I'm not a gun owner, so I don't know, as a gun owner, is there required training to own a gun? I have to go back every several years to get a new driver's license to drive a car. To have that right. It's my right to drive a car, it's my right to drive a gun. Is there any talk or reason we can't have the same thing for gun ownership and car ownership to require training? That people that have firearms do understand what they have.
That'd be a question for the legislature. Indiana recently became a constitutional carry state, which meant that there's no license requirement, and so any person can own a firearm, but that aren't prohibited with due to prior convictions and things like that. So, but yeah, there's no requirement for training.
It does make sense. I thought that when I first had my my concealed and carry permit, I was like, this is it. You can prove, I think they looked at my criminal record and then, fingerprint. And then, I came back and I got it. Man, there should be some sort of training. Yeah, I hear
drivers had to get a car.
Yeah. Hopefully we're not utilizing a firearm every day. I mean, there's certain professions that have to, but yeah, no, I hear you there now. All right. Good. All right. Well, I'll wrap up tonight's conversation with thanking you for being with us. We hope that this conversation has been beneficial, or possibly will be for those who might find this recorded conversation as a resource later on. This is, it'll be uploaded to LifeSpring's YouTube channel. So if that's something that somebody wants to go back to and find, you can find it there. But with that said, get your snow shovels ready for tomorrow. Have a good evening.